want to illustrate what we're going to be talking about this morning. I'd like to illustrate it with a story from my life that really follows this Bible study that we are going to be discussing. And it happened when I was in my young 20s. We had a big group of friends. And in our friends, the girls of our friends, every few months would they would do this thing called ladies' nights. And that's basically where all the girls would hang out, and no guys were allowed to hang out with them. It was just their night. And so the guys would go out and do something different. So this one particular time that they were doing it, the girls had this plan, this scheming plan. They thought, I know, for ladies' nights this month, let's prank the guys. See, one of the people were house-sitting a house. It was a big house. And they know, I don't know what it is with guys, but they know that if we found out an opportunity to startle them or scare them, in a house all alone, they knew we'd take it. I don't know what it is. I don't know if you guys are the same as me, but every time I'm standing somewhere and my wife is walking down, I'm hide behind a door, and then I'm ah! I don't know what it is, scares the baby out of her and stuff. She's pregnant right now. So they leak this information about where they're going to be to Jeremy Miller. And they're hoping that Jeremy takes the bait and grabs us. And Jeremy comes to all of us. He's like, guys, listen to this. I just found out where the girls are going to be tonight and what they're going to be doing. We should totally go and scare them. And we're like, no way, dude. That's a trap. They are trying to do something. They're conniving against us. They have a plan. And so there we were driving over to their house. And that's how it works. And we're driving over to their house, this house, and we park and we start making our way up the street because we don't want them to know we're there. And we see something parked out in front of the house. There's a car, but inside the car, we can see a head of someone sitting inside. And the head, we're looking, we're like, oh, that's weird. They're just sitting in a dark car. And then all of a sudden the head drops down. And the whole cab lights up with light from a cell phone. And we're like, what? Let's go check that out. Something's going on here. And there was our friend Amy as the watchdog, and she's trying to dial the house really quick to tell them that we're here because she saw us. And she locked all the doors and rolled up all the windows. So we're jumping on the car, and the car's bouncing around. And she's like, they're here. So we leave her alone, and we go up to the side of the house where the yard is. We want to know what the perimeter's like. And so we're on the side of the fence that leads to the backyard. Unbeknownst to us, the girls are all back there in different stations with water balloons. And they're waiting for us to cross over that gate. And you can just imagine them, up in the corner I can't wait to get them. And so Jeremy, he's like, all right, let me take a look. And so we're kind of crouched behind the gate. He's like, let me take a look and see what we're dealing with. And he looks over, he looks both ways, and it's pretty dark, and his head goes back down. And my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, tells me the story from behind it. She said that they got their water balloons in hand, and they're ready. They can't wait. They're ready to nail us. And then a head pops up over the gate, looks both ways, and goes back down. And every single girl drops all their water balloons, screams in terror, and runs inside the house. And here we are, looking around, finding water balloons. It was so wonderful. And these girls worked so hard. They did so good. They had a good plan. They got us hook, line, and sinker. They were pulling us in. They should have been able to attack us at any moment. We were going to be ready. But the thing was, when time came to actually pull the trigger, when time came to attack, when time came to actually go to battle with us, they found out what was inside of them: a bunch of screams and yells. Now, what we're going to be talking about is just that. See, I want to talk about one of my favorite stories in the Bible, a story in the Bible that has probably had more effect on me than most other stories. And it's a story about an army who thought they were ready for battle. An army who was going out to meet their foes, was going out and thought that they were ready to fight, thought that they were ready to go and take and be victorious, to draw away this army that had walked onto their land. But in the end, they found out, just like those girls, that they were not ready for battle. What they were was full of a bunch of yells and screams. And we're going to be talking about this. And God showed me something in this story. He showed me a question. He asked me a question. And that question that he asked me 4 years ago has dictated my life for the last 4 years. It was a question that grabbed my heart, that tugged me, and has been in my decisions ever since then. And I want to show you, I want to read you a story. It's one of my favorite, and I want to challenge you while we go through this story. It's a story you all know. It's a story of David and Goliath, but I want to ask you guys to do something. Sometimes when you hear a story that you've heard so many times, you know it backwards and forwards, your mind turns off to the story. But I want to magnify some different details in the story that probably a lot of us have read over and not known, not seen. It was the details that God gave me when I read this that affected me so deeply. So I want to challenge you to stay along with this story of David and Goliath. We're going to read through it, the very first part of this message, so that you guys can see some key details that I want to bring out, and then we're going to talk about it. So let's go to 1 Samuel 17, 2 through 4. And we're going to be in 1 Samuel 17, so if you have your Bibles, just keep it there. Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up in, what's that word? That's a detail I want you to remember. They drew up in battle array to encounter the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on the mountain on one side while Israel stood on the mountain on the other side and the valley between them. Then a champion came out of the armies of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits in a span. We already know he was big, nearly 10 feet, big, gigantic, scary guy. Let's move to verse 8 through 11. And this is what Goliath said. He says, he stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel and said to them, "Why do you draw up in battle array?" There's that word again. "Am I not a Philistine, and you servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourself and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will become your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall become our servants and serve us." Again, the Philistines said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." And when Saul and all of Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. There it was again. He says, "Why do you show up in battle array? Why do you stand up there like we're going to fight? Send me one man. Send your best against our best. One man." Now, this next verse that we're going to read is something that I'll bet most of us didn't know. I had no idea that this happened. Let's read chapter 17, verse 16. Just go down a couple verses. It says, "The Philistine, Goliath, came forward morning and evening for 40 days and took his stand." How many times did Goliath come out and taunt God? 80. 80. Good job. 80. Because he came out morning. We won't look at the people that said 40. It's okay. Morning and evening for 40 days. 80 times the Lord, not the Lord. 80 times Goliath came out and taunted God. 80 times. That's a big number. It's not a big number if you have $80 in your bank account. That's a really small number. And a depressing number. 80 times when it's tied to doing an action is a big number. I'll bet you, if you're 35 or under in here, you haven't been to the doctors 80 times. I haven't. Probably haven't been to the dentist 80 times. In fact, I'll bet you if you're 30 or below in here, you probably haven't flossed 80 times. Okay? I'll bet you most of us, unless you own a big truck or something, most of us don't fill up gas 80 times a year. 80 is a big number when it's tied to doing something. Let's keep going with this story. The story moves to David, and Jesse sends David. So we're going to jump to verse 20 through 24. So actually, we're probably just going to read 20 and 21. "So David rose early in the morning and left the flock with the keeper and took the supplies and went as Jesse, as his dad, had commanded him. And he came to the circle of the camp while the army was going out in" what? "Shouting the..." and Israel and the Philistines drew up in battle array, army against army. God really showed me something here. He really pricked my heart and pulled on it, because what I saw is that the Philistine, Goliath, came out. Remember, this was in the morning, so this is time 81. Philistine had come out 81 times. But you know what else? Not only did he do something 81 times, it shows that the Israelites did something crazy 81 times. 81 times the Israelites went out in battle array shouting their war cry. What? It's important to think about, what is a war cry? Why would you come out in battle array? The point is to empower. When you come out in battle array with your battle cry, the point is to empower the troops to victory. It's supposed to give them hope and strength that whatever's laying ahead of them, that they can win. It's meant, you see like Braveheart, and they come out to the battlefield shouting and yelling, and, they got their sword, and they're hitting their shield, and they're making a lot of noise. And it's supposed to put adrenaline inside of them and realize that we can do this if we work together. That's the point. But these guys did it 81 times. To illustrate this point about a war cry, I want to tell you a story about me and my friend Pat Turrieta. Is Pat here? Me and Pat Turrieta, he's right over there. We would take these trips to the Channel Islands for a week. We'd sail out there, a crew of us. And this one particular time we were out there, we had just gotten into spearfishing. When I mean we were about ready to make like our first dive. And we borrowed a friend's gun. It was $200. And we bought a Hawaiian sling. And now we're in our kayak, and we're kayaking from the boat to a place. We probably kayaked half a mile to get to this place. We got our wetsuits on. We got our weight belts on. We got all our gear, and we're trying to get our gear on. And Pat says, I tipped the boat. But I'm the guy with the microphone. So Pat tipped the boat, and all of our gear went all the way down. It was about 40 feet. And we don't really care about most of our gear, but we do care about that $200 gun, because when you're in your young 20s, $200 might as well be $2 million. So I dived down, and luckily, my first dive, the spear had stuck in the sand, so it was about 10 feet off the ground, and I was able to grab the spear and come up. But here's the thing, we didn't know how to dive, and we didn't realize that you need to equalize. So you plug your nose, and you talk really weird. You plug your nose, and you blow out your nose, and I don't know what happens. Your brains plug your ears. I don't know, okay? But you equalize, and all of a sudden, the pressure, when you swim to the bottom of your pool, your head hurts, the pressure goes away. Well, I didn't do that. So I come up, it was probably about 40 feet, and my ears are just done for. And I can't dive very deep anymore because of the pain in my ears. So now we have to wait for Pat to get the spear gun down on the ocean floor. So we have this, so he can't get it. We keep trying. It's just too far. He didn't have enough lung capacity. So what we did is I took off my weight belt, and I put it on him. So now he has 26 pounds of lead. And we have this idea. All right, Pat, you dive down there like a rock, and I'll swim behind you. And you pick up the gun, and then you swim as hard as you can up, and then I'll grab you, and you can go limp, and I'll take you the rest of the way. How many go, that's how young people die, okay? And we try this a number of times, and he could never get all the way down before turning around and coming up, until finally we're sitting on the edge of this boat, our kayak holding it. And I remember it so clearly. It's like, and he does too, it's like the water stopped, the waves stopped, the water calmed, and like Braveheart music came out of the background. And I said, Pat, I realized something. I said, Pat, look at me right now. And he's like, looks at me, and he's so tired. I'm like, this is our last dive. This is our last dive, because we're going to get this gun right now. It's not that far down, and you can do it. I know you can. I've seen you dive this before. I was like, that gun is worth $200. I'm calling this dive 200. And Pat, trust me, I'll be behind you. And so that dive, so he's just nodding his head, and that dive, he goes down and he disappears into the murk. And I can't see him, and I'm just kicking my little brains out, and then all of a sudden I see him with this gun swimming back up. And like the goggles right here, so it's this like weird like smile, out of the goggles. I started to cry, I was so happy. But It was this talk and this pep talk, this war cry that we had before that produced the energy and the zeal, whatever it was, to go and get that gun. That was the only thing that changed. That's what a war cry does, and these Israelites had done it 81 times. I'll tell you what, if Pat came up and I said, okay, this is the last dive again, it took away all the power, doesn't it? In fact, I'll bet you that the war cries that the Israelites were giving were pretty minimal. I'll bet they didn't even matter all that much anymore. I'll bet they didn't carry with it very much power. And when I read this, the Lord pricked my heart. And he said, Neil, he made sure that I saw that. And all of a sudden, I was frustrated at those Israelites. Are you kidding me right now? You went up in battle array shouting a war cry 81 times to the same thing that you failed at 81 times in a row, and you're not going to make it your 81st? You know, is that frustrating? Do you guys feel that? Do you guys sense that frustration? Why would you do something with such an empty boast inside of it 81 times? And the Lord tells me now, I said, Lord, they frustrate me. And I felt the Lord say, now you know my frustration. I'm like, yes, I do. Those dumb Israelites. How many of you guys think that he was talking to me right there? He said, Neil, my people do this to me every day. He says, they come with me and give me empty boasts. They stand around and they say, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, yeah! And then continually fall to that one thing all the time, as if I'm not big enough to take it. He said, every day they come and give up their shouts and they give their grunts to me, but continually fall before the Goliath in their lives. Every night they fall to drunkenness and then come to church the next morning shouting their war cries. Every night men fall before the internet and get up and go to home group the next morning with their hands raised, crying out that I am their victor. He says that many times when we think that we're full of a battle spirit, we're actually full of empty boasts. And then he said something I didn't like. Neil, what are you full of? He said that the Goliaths of their lives are never fought. They're only looked at. Their cries weren't enough to provoke them to action. And I felt the Lord say, Neil, what are your cries like? What's your war cry like? What's your battle array like? Does it provoke you to action, or is it full of a bunch of show? Because the truth is, sometimes we have no idea if we're full of show. We really mean what we say, but when push comes to shove, we find out that it's an empty boast. And it was hard for me to answer this question. And the Lord takes as I keep reading, he gives me another cry that there was that day. Not a cry, but a loud war cry, a shout. And it was David's. We're not going to turn to it, but it's 1 Samuel 17, 34 through 37. David is in Saul's tent. We know the story. And he's telling Saul, I want to go out there and fight this Philistine. He says, your servant David has killed both the lion by the hand of the Lord and the bear by the hand of the Lord. And this uncircumcised Philistine is taunting the Lord, and God will deliver him into my hand too. See, it wasn't a shout. It wasn't a yell. He didn't come in there banging pots and pans trying to get ready. He came in with a completely different cry. And I'll tell you, I would have loved to hear how he said it, because Saul, the king of the army, it says that he looks at David, and when David comes in, he says, you're but a youth. You have no warrior in you. We know he was a youth. We know he was a shepherd. How many of you guys think it's easy for a king to send an untrained youth out to his death? I don't think a king would do that. I don't think a king would do that. I think he'd say, no, I'm sorry, sit here. Chain him to the chair so he doesn't do anything dumb, okay? Here's another thing to think about. Whoever went out to fight Goliath was representing all of Israel. Whether or not they would have surrendered, I don't think they would have. But it didn't matter. They were still, whoever went out was representing all of Israel. And in this case, it was a little shepherd boy. Saul looked at all of his army, and what he heard come out of David's mouth was so powerful that he let David go. And we know what happens in the story. And the Lord says, Neil, there's two types of people. Either you're going to be full of shouts and screams, or you're going to be full of the power and presence of me to go defeat Goliath. Where are you, Neil? And I want to ask you guys that same question. Where are you? See, for me, it was hard for me to answer that question. It took a lot longer than one reading to be able to answer that question. But I'll tell you what, that question has dictated me for the last 4 years. Every time something comes up, it dictates my answer of what am I going to do? Well, am I going to be full of shouts, or am I going to put my money where my mouth is? Lord gave me 3 things. We're going to look at these 3 things. We're going to contrast in 3 areas, the Israelites versus David. And they're the 3 reasons that people give war cries but never fight. So let's pull up the first one. The first one, this is why the Israelites gave a war cry but never fought. And the first point is that they lost their anger. Now I'm going to talk very briefly on anger, this idea about anger, that there's righteous anger and there's unrighteous anger. Okay, Jesus was angry in the Bible. Remember when he went to the temple and he threw over the money changers' the tables, right? He was angry there. There's a thing called righteous anger, and there's a thing called unrighteous anger. Righteous anger is getting mad at the enemy for trying to take away the things that are rightfully God's. That is righteous anger. Righteous anger should rise up inside of us for the areas that the enemy is trying to take away from what is rightfully God's. But these guys had lost their anger. See, sometimes we can get angry for something for a little bit and lose it really fast. In fact, about 1.5 years ago, I was sitting over there. It was Memorial Day weekend, and me and my wife were sitting right on the aisle, and Nita, Danny Esslinger's wife, Danny's the high school pastor, comes up to the aisle and starts talking to my wife during announcements. You know, no big deal. They're talking. Well, their conversation is like a long conversation. They're talking all the way through announcements. Dave comes up on stage, and it's Memorial Day weekend, and Dave says, I'd like to honor all those in military. If you'd please stand up, we'd like to honor you. And they're still talking. So I see my opportunity, and I lean over, and I'm like, girls, you guys got to stop talking and pay attention. Dave just asked all the moms to stand up so he can honor them. So my wife, who knows me pretty well, looks around and doesn't stand up. But Nita stands up like a full mass. I mean, like she's mom of the year. And then she looks around and sees that there's a lot of guys standing up right now. And it was like watching a balloon deflate as she falls to the ground. And then she looks at me like she's gonna kill me. But how many of you guys know that feeling was very short-lived? See, sometimes as Christians, we get mad at the things, we have a righteous anger that comes up for something that's going on that angers God, but it goes away really fast. That's what these guys had. See, when they went out to the battlefield, on their way out to the battlefield, they were angry. You better believe me, they were angry. They were upset. They were not happy with what was being taken away from them. They were ready to push those Israelites back to Gath or Philistinopia. I don't know, I think they're all from Gath, I don't know. To send them back to one of their 5 cities. But when they got there, their anger went away because their anger turned into something else. Let's read it, 1 Samuel 17, verse 11. This is what happens when they come upon Goliath. When Saul and all Israel heard those words that Goliath had said, they were dismayed. Dismayed means to be shattered and broken, and they were greatly afraid. See, their anger turned into fear. And that could happen. Their anger switched from a righteous anger of what what the enemy is taking away from God, and it turns into fear. Where am I? People who are afraid run, but people who are angry fight. Can I say that again? People who are afraid run, and people who are angry fight. See, fear had paralyzed these Israelites to be anything more than a bunch of shouts and a bunch of cries. They were empty boasts. And fear will strip us just the same. Fear will strip us from fighting any addictions in our life, the Goliath of that addiction in our life. Fear will strip it. Fear will strip you from being victorious in your life because you're too afraid to fail. We need to make sure that as much as we can, we get that fear out, because fear will take away righteous anger. But David was different. They turned that anger into fear, but David was different. Let's look at verse 26. Tell me if this verse sounds like a guy who's afraid or a guy who's angry. Then David spoke to the men who were standing by him, saying, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God?" Does he sound like he's afraid? He sounds like he's ready to kick some bottom. You can read in verse 36 and in verse 45. There's no fear inside of David. There's a righteous anger for the reproach that is on Israel right now. He is mad, and he wants to get it out of there. Anger rose up towards those who taunted and tried to take what was rightfully God's. Listen, a person who is angry on the right grounds, against the right thing, in the right manner, at the right moment, will scare and bring fear to the enemy and be victorious. We have to make sure that we don't push what angers God out of us. See, the problem with many Christians is we become indifferent towards things. We become indifferent. You get angry because you care. You are indifferent because you just don't care. We need to start caring a lot more for the things that are trying to be taken away that are rightfully God's. And I felt the Lord challenge me. He said, "Neil, how do you feel about the wickedness in society? How do you feel about the indoctrination of our youth?" And he asks you guys all the same question. How do you feel about the smut and the filth on TV? How do you feel about AB 1266? That's the bill that no matter your chromosome, no matter your body parts, you, young person, get to decide if you're a male or a female and use the male or female bathrooms and the male or female locker rooms. How do you feel about the homosexual agenda, forcing sexual immorality and confusion on our sons and our daughters and on our brothers and sisters? Now, this is important. Righteous anger is never angry at a person. Okay? But it can be angry at the sin that is attacking that person. I'll tell you what, that's a good question to ask ourselves. Am I angry, or have I become indifferent? Am I angry at the things that are being taken away from the Lord, or have I become indifferent? Because that's going to be one of your ways to answer that question. Am I full of a bunch of shouts, or am I like David? Let's look at the second point. Second point is that they had made peace with the enemy's presence in the land. 1 Samuel 17:1, we read right in the beginning, "Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle." This is the Philistines. They were gathered at Socoh, which belongs to Judah, which belongs to God. This is important. The Philistines were on God's land. Now let's read verse 16. How many days were they on God's land untouched, unattacked? 40 days they were unattacked. 40 days they were on God's land with no attack. Were the Israelites in attack mode or defense? They were in defense. See, they were standing on the valley looking at their land that was currently occupied by the Philistines and saying, "Don't come any closer." If a foreign nation came onto our soil, isn't that funny that I'm talking about this right now? But if a foreign nation came onto American, U.S. soil, would we just say, "Okay, don't come any closer. Is that what we would say? No, we would not. Would they last 40 days? No, they would not. They would not. But yet, these guys, these Philistines, 40 days untouched because the Israelites were not on attack mode anymore. Now they were on defense. They had made peace with the conceded land of the Philistines. You guys see that? They conceded that land and said, okay, stay there. Because if they wanted that land back, they would have been flanked them. They would have done all types of military strategies to get around Goliath, or like a arrow sniper dude. That's a good idea. Why didn't they do that? David felt much different within minutes of being there. Within minutes of being there, this is what David says in verse 26. He just gets there. David says this, "Then David spoke to the men who were standing by him, saying, 'What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away this reproach from Israel?'" Does he sound like he's made peace with them being on that land? Has he conceded that land? No, not a chance. He's mad about it. He says, this is not right. This is not how it should be, and I'm not okay for them to stand there. So what are we going to do? Who's going to kill this stupid guy? David felt much different. The Lord revealed something to me. He said, Neil, a lot of us are like those Israelites in the fact that we have conceded part of our lives, a part of our hearts. We've conceded and made peace with the fact that we're going to be porn addicts. We just are. And that's too big of a battle to attack. We've conceded to the fact that we're just going to be addicted to alcohol or whatever addiction. We're going to go to church and we're going to worship God. We're going to go to home group and we're going to pray to God and seek Him out. We're even going to maybe read our Bibles with our family. But that area of our life, we've just conceded and said it's just too big, and I'm a really good Christian everywhere else. Made peace with the fact that we're sleeping with our boyfriends or our girlfriends. That maybe we're different at work than we are at church. At church, I can act like a Christian, and at home, I'll act like a Christian, but at work, it's cutthroat. It's different. You have to lie and cheat. That's the way this industry is. You know, maybe it's the music and movies that you listen to. I got a great Christian couple recommended me to watch this TV show. They said, oh, you'll love it. You'll laugh so hard. It's great. And off their recommendation, I watched it. The entire thing from start to finish was fornication. It was sexual immorality. The entire thing, all the way through. If you were to take everything that either was or talked about sex out of it, it would be 100 seconds long. And I remember thinking, I'm not allowing this in my house. But you know what? This certain couple had just made reality of the fact that that's what they're going to allow in their house. They're going to worship God here, and they're going to read their Bible, and they're even going to teach their kids and those around them about the Lord, but we're going to watch this stuff at home. We've made peace with that idea. David, no way. That's not how David worked. He was not going to make peace with the enemy's encampment. Question, are you at peace? God said, Neil, are you at peace with the reproach that the enemy is trying to make in your life? Are you at peace, or do you want the reproach to be taken away from God's anointed? And that was a hard question. And if you ask yourself that question, it might be a hard question, but it's a question that we should be continually asking ourselves. It's what made David someone more than a bunch of shouts. Let's look at point 3, the last point, is they misunderstood the real issue. See, it's important to know the right issue at hand. If you know what the right issue is, you know how to fight it correctly. You know where to fight it, in what way, and in what time. But if you don't look at the issue right, it's going to be hard to win. I got a video that we're going to show right now to illustrate this point. It's with a husband and a wife. You like it?
There's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
Yeah, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See,
out.
you're not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just... Sometimes it's like there's this achy... I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Come on. If you would just...
Don't.
Try to see things my way. Do I have to keep on talking till I can?
All right. That's a good illustration. You need to know what the real issue is. And I think if you've been married any length of time, men, you know this, that when something comes up, you don't attack that thing right away, right? Because that's not what your wife wants to do. She wants to talk about it and then attack it. Is that true? Women's like, yes, see, he knows. For the man, the real issue in that moment is not the nail. The real issue in that moment is to talk about the nail. And then tomorrow, you guys will pull the nail out. Is that right? It's important to know the issue that you have. If he just attacked the nail, you want to know what's going to happen? Nothing. No. Well, we're not going to talk about the other side. Okay. It's important to not misunderstand the real issue at hand. This is what the Israelites saw. Verse 25. This is what they saw. They saw, there it is. The men of Israel said, have you seen this man who is coming up? Surely he is coming up to defy all of Israel. Surely he is coming up to defy, this crazy, gigantic, hairy man. All the biggest people I know are hairy, so he's scary. He's like out of my nightmares. He's an unbeatable force. We can't take him. That was the issue that the Israelites saw. But they saw it wrong. David saw it different. David saw a mortal man defying an almighty God. See, the Israelites saw them versus Goliath, but David saw God versus Goliath. Because in verses 36 and 37, this is what David says. He says, I've killed a lion by the hand of the Lord. I've killed a bear by the hand of the Lord. And this guy taunted God, and he's going to die by the hand of the Lord. It wasn't ever going to be David versus God. He never saw it that way. He looked at the problem through God's point of view. And I felt the Lord ask me this last question. He says, Neil, what have you magnified in your life to be bigger than it really is? What have you magnified in your life to be unconquerable, to be so big that it just has to stay inside of your life? What against me? What have you made in your life that you are too afraid to attack? Because I am bigger than that thing. You just have to look at it right. You're not in this alone. You're in it with me. Let's have the band come up right now. It's important for us to answer this question, all of us to answer this question. Am I full of a bunch of shouts? Like the girls that were having that ladies' night. Am I full of a bunch of shouts? Like the Israelites who are trying to stop what the enemy was trying to do inside of their lives, inside of their land? Or are you going to be like this one guy in this story, this one guy that made the real difference? This one guy that changed the outcome of that whole thing. This one guy that God kept using throughout the entire Bible to do incredible and powerful things because he learned to be more than a bunch of shouts and cries. He learned to put force and God's Spirit behind everything he did. He had anger for what angered God, and he did not make peace with what the enemy was trying to take away, and he never thought it was him versus something else. He always knew it was God versus something else. So let's stand up right now. I want to challenge you in this first song to evaluate your life. To evaluate your own self. Am I more than a bunch of screams? Or is there a Goliath that is currently in my life that is not being attacked very hard? Do I show up 81 times in battle array and never take that area of my land because I believe that the Lord wants to give you that land back? I think that there's been a long time that the Lord's been saying, I want to give you your land back. And I want to take the reproach away from God's anointed. So, Father, Lord Jesus, we ask for your presence to come in here. Lord Jesus, and to search us and to know us. Father, to reveal us to ourselves. And Lord, would you come down and would you reveal if there's anything inside of us, Lord, that you want to get rid of today, this morning. Something that you want to bring freedom in so that we can be more like David, so that we can be loud, more than just loud shouts. We can be loud change. Lord, we love you. Minister to us right now.